What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some interesting initial details about UnderRail 2 Infusion, a game whose relatively quiet development I have been following for a long time, but which finally got enough info to make a proper video about, which is obviously what we are doing here. As it finally has a Steam page, got a big gameplay update video from its developer and publisher, Stygian Software, but let's back up a moment. I don't think it's unreasonable for people to have no idea what this game is, and that's fair because the original UnderRail is what I would describe as a bit notoriously difficult for a lot of people. It's incredibly good if you are into CRPGs, but it is by its very nature and systems kind of niche. Mostly in that it really doesn't have a problem punishing you for failure or failure to plan, things like that. I originally took a look at UnderRail all the way back in 2021. It's been a long time since I've talked about this. And even back then, they were already working on the sequel here, Infusion. It's been slow going. Stygian Software is a small indie company, but it looks like they've finally made some real progress here. We have a bunch of details to talk about. It looks like they're shooting for an early access release sometime next year. And I wanted to take a minute to just kind of shine a light on what they're doing and try to amplify it a little bit because I thought the first game was really cool. And with that in mind, let's first set the stage a little bit. So UnderRail, as the name would probably imply a little bit there, takes place in an underground railway system. You see, the surface of the Earth has just become completely uninhabitable, and so people have moved into the metro tunnels, basically, which, if it sounds familiar, it should. It's the subject of more than one type of other media that I know of. But add on top of that the fact that it is an isometric CRPG with a whole lot of unique systems. For starters, it's a solo game, really. You play by yourself. That is to say, your singular character that you make, as opposed to a proper party. The first game, as I mentioned, was known for being notoriously difficult, but it's the kind of game where people hit a wall so fast they don't tend to elaborate on what that means, and I would describe it more as an unforgiving game. If you make mistakes, it's going to punish you for them. Although it did have one other problem, which is that it was not a very reactive game in the sense that during a first playthrough you're going to have a lot of trouble because it's the type of game, because you're playing a singular character, if you don't know what's coming up and exactly how you're going to deal with it, it's likely going to cause you no small amount of headache. And that's why there was a pretty big community, at least at one time. I don't know if it's still ongoing, so to speak, but there was a big community at one point that was dedicated to making builds and stuff that were known as viable and could get through the entire game, because there are a few choke points in the original that could cause you some serious problems and honestly be what led you to a potential restart. Combine that with bringing the game to 3D, adding a proper sandbox, and you kind of get an idea of what Infusion is trying to improve upon. So the key thing to understand is that UnderRail 1 was really the type of game that had a really solid tactical foundation and build crafting and systems, and Infusion here seems to be trying to take all of that while advancing a lot of those systems and expanding on what the game did graphically even. So probably the biggest, most immediate change that you'll notice from the gameplay if you've played the first one is that they've built out a proper 3D world here with a significant amount of verticality. It does look to be fixed camera isometric, so you're not going to be moving that around really. But you are in a 3D environment that can be navigated as such. There's height differences. You can use those heights to your advantage in combat, things like that. That wasn't really a thing in the original very much, so already a pretty big step up just on that alone. Now perhaps a much bigger change though is what they've done with combat. You see, the original game had a very traditional sort of action point, movement point type of turn-based system. That's fine, but as a solo character playing the game, this runs into a few problems, where if you get a bad roll on initiative, that kind of thing, you're probably just dead. Especially if you're fighting more than just a couple of enemies, because you're going to get ganged up on super fast. And that was kind of the being proactive portion of what I mentioned just a moment ago, because if you don't know what you're up against and you can't plan for it accordingly, you're likely to have a bad time. They wanted to change that here by introducing instead a simultaneous turn-based system. Or at least that's what I've always called these types of games, but the game is essentially turn-based, yes. However, the catch is all of the enemies move when you move. It's slightly more complicated than that in the sense of like how individual attacks and actions are queued in the background. So if you're surrounded by 3 enemies, they won't literally all attack you at once, but they'll actually like take a turn attacking you as appropriate. But truth be told, that description is a little bit simplistic, because if you were to dig under the hood, what's actually happening here is there is a time mechanic. Everything your character does costs a certain amount of time. The enemy units can then take their actions based on how much time you've used, and they're going to spend that time doing their movements and their attacks and whatnot, provided they have enough time built up from what you're doing in order to do those things. Now, the interesting thing about simultaneous turn-based systems is that they are very difficult to get right, I would say. So in a lot of ways, they're a combination of things like real-time with pause and your traditional turn-based systems, but as a singular character, there's still plenty of opportunity here for you to just get straight up outnumbered, and I'll be curious to see the final iteration of this system, and I don't want to go too deep on it right now because it's still pretty bare bones in terms of our own knowledge. But I'd say for right now, that's probably the most important stuff to know. And yet, there's still plenty of other things to know. In relation to like weapons, how every weapon type is going to have special attacks via like knives and the various weapons you can use. They do plan on adding psionics from the first game back in, but it's not in the current build at the moment, so they couldn't show it off. There will also be a crafting system where you can like properly build out weapons and customize them accordingly and kind of like make your own unique stuff. And they also showcased a couple of other skill systems like lockpicking and using computers to do some hacking, though without a proper tutorial on screen it was a little difficult to parse the specifics of these systems. I mean, lockpicking is straightforward enough, but the computer system, I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking at just based on what they were doing. However, truth be told, as interesting as all that stuff is, it's really not what drew my eye the most, because if you look at the game's Steam page, and I mention the Steam page specifically because it didn't appear in the video so much, is that one thing they're aiming to do is actually build a dynamic world this time. And what that basically means is a sandbox type world where all of the NPCs in the various cities you'll meet have proper schedules and are at different places working on different things at different times. Apparently they're going so far as to allow these characters to like actually properly interact with the other systems in game, such as the computer network that came up with like the hacking and whatnot. Now that's especially interesting to me because that type of gameplay is not something you see translated to CRPGs very often or at like length really. More often than not, with isometric CRPGs, what you typically see is characters move around based on like individual quest progression, things like that, as opposed to like a fully sandbox system where they are genuinely moving around based on schedule. Some of them can do that, but if that is actually fully implemented as mentioned on that Steam page, that would be a remarkable thing to cover about this game specifically. But as for today and these details that I can share with you right now, that seems to be the gist of it. Mostly, I was just excited to talk about this upcoming CRPG as there was finally something to talk about. And to that end, if you want to show this game some support, really the best thing to do is just wishlist it over on Steam, which is why I'm going to drop the Steam page down in the description. But either way, obviously, I'm going to continue to cover it. I'm pretty excited to get my hands on this when it eventually hits its early access release at some point. So you can certainly simply expect more coverage when there is relevant stuff to cover, which might still be a little while, as it's probably apparent it's a little slow going on their end. But given how much I enjoyed the original all those years ago, on top of some of the stuff they've showcased just from what they're trying to do here with this one, I think there's potential for this to be a really interesting game, doing some unique stuff. And I wanted to sort of just amplify what they were up to, which is the point of this video, and hopefully it accomplishes just that. But either way, very cool update, excited to see what people think of this one, and hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you're looking forward to any of that, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.